This is my reaction video on a November 12th, Friday, 2021, to the Alabama Crimson Tide defeating the Tennessee Volunteers for 52-24, and the Tennessee Volunteers defeating the Kentucky Wildcats in a thrilling, amazing, high-scoring game, 45-42. Start with the Alabama game. Crimson Tide ended up defeating the Tennessee Volunteers and covering that spread, winning 52-24. I was very happy that my Tennessee Volunteers in this game ended up keeping it competitive for the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, more than 1 minute of the fourth quarter until that interception, which completely changed momentum. Alabama took advantage and scored a third touchdown, and then the momentum completely changed, and Alabama didn't have any struggles with Tennessee after that, which was just extremely depressing because my Tennessee Volunteers ended up showing the ability in that game to compete with not just compete with Alabama, they actually led in Alabama for multiple minutes in the first half, and they gave me optimism because they were competing. They kept the game close in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter, that they would have the ability to win this challenging game, except they weren't, because Alabama finally got the exact turnover they needed to hugely change momentum, and Alabama Crimson Tide offense usually took advantage, scoring a needed touchdown to increase the lead to 3 touchdowns, which is too much for the Volunteers to overcome because they weren't able to decrease that lead to two touchdowns. And the Crimson Tide, wanting to cover the spread, were able to score another touchdown, so they were able to cover the spread. I was extremely happy that even though one is obvious, the Tennessee Volunteers, they were not going to win this game, and Alabama mainly just had the intention to cover the spread and make this game even worse than after it becoming an embarrassment, is they didn't give up, they didn't quit, they didn't roll over. They could have easily done that. So they didn't. This is a team that, even when it's obvious they're not going to win, they're not going to quit, they're not going to roll the hell over and give the hell up. That's not who they are. I was extremely happy that I was also extremely happy that this was they were mostly doing exactly what I predicted, because they had success running the football. They had a high amount of success passing the football, including busted coverage on Alabama, taking advantage of that, touchdown. Also, the defense was created a turnover when it really looked like Alabama was going to score. Tennessee Volunteers defense didn't give up. It created a turnover, recovered that fumble. Also, the Tennessee Volunteers in the second half had an amazing special play. Very much like the Frank Beamer Virginia Tech Hokies, because they blocked the punt. It's possible they got lucky. No, they didn't just get lucky. They freaking owned that. The special teams dominated on that play. Player dominated on special teams to block the punt. Was unhappy the Volunteers weren't able to get a touchdown after that, because that was like a huge momentum changer, except they still had a chance to win still had a chance to actually tie the game in the fourth quarter. And exactly what happened, as far as Volunteers weren't able to, this was disappointing also, because I said the Volunteers defense would defend when needed, and obviously they weren't able to defend when needed, because even before that interception in the fourth quarter, even whenever the Volunteers were able to get the lead down to 1 touchdown, Alabama would just soul crush the Volunteers and Volunteers fans with moving the football easily, quick strike, increasing that lead back to 2 touchdowns, which was just really frustrating. Extremely frustrating, because they did enough to get the game down to 1, but except the defense can't. So that was very frustrating, but not as frustrating as obviously the interception, because of Crimson Tide defense Crimson Tide defender made a great play, and he had a good return, and the Crimson Tide offense took advantage. That was what was most frustrating, because even if the Volunteers didn't win this game, because there's a high possibility if this got to overtime, Crimson Tide still could have highly likely won because they're just a great team. Tennessee Volunteers are still a team, still a good team that's still having to learn how to finish games against great teams. It's still very disappointing that they did enough to keep the game. I'm still very disappointed that they did enough to keep the game watchable for not just for 3-4 quarters, but also for more than 1 minute of the fourth quarter. Gave me the optimism that they were going to be able to win this game. They weren't able to because Alabama was able to soul crush them and just play great, play great exactly as they needed to remove the drama in this game. That was a close game for more than 45 game minutes. So that was just. So I'm really happy my Tennessee Volunteers gave me a game that was watchable, that I was not depressed watching until after they went up to like 3 touchdowns, because my optimism dropped down. It wasn't completely gone, it did drop down because I knew that because I just know the Volunteers are a good team, but they're not a great team that has that ability in the fourth quarter to come back from down 3 touchdowns against a great team, whether on the road or at home. They don't have that ability. Oregon Ducks I wouldn't doubt that the Oregon Ducks have that ability. The Cincinnati Bearcats that have a high-scoring offense, they have that ability, I wouldn't doubt. Oklahoma Sooners, they do have a high-scoring. They've shown they have a high scoring up, so I wouldn't doubt at all that they have that ability to come. If they're down by 3 touchdowns, that they'd have the ability to come back if they're down by 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to still win the game. So I'm extremely happy the Tennessee Volunteers. On the positive, I will say I'm very happy the Tennessee Volunteers gave me a game that was watchable for the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, multiple minutes of the fourth quarter. They competed with Alabama. They ran with Alabama until Alabama was able to remove the drama over this game with that interception, move the football, score a touchdown, increase the lead to three touchdowns, and then all the drama was removed because it was shown Volunteers don't have that ability to. They just weren't able to recover after that. So I'm very happy. Tennessee Volunteers gave me a game that was watchable for more than 45 game minutes. They competed with Alabama for more than 45 game minutes. They actually led Alabama in the first half. They kept the game close and watchable for more than 45 game minutes, which has not happened for a long amount of time. And they also, even when it was obvious this team wasn't. But even when it was obvious they were not going to win, they didn't just freaking roll over, give up, and quit. Like, go ahead, cover the spread because we're not going to win, so why the hell should we continue to compete? They didn't do that because they're champions that just don't give the hell up. Even when it's obvious they're not going to win, they don't give the hell up. They don't roll over. Just let a team just freaking walk all over them or run all over them. That's not who they are. That's not who the 2021 Tennessee Volunteers are. So, well, and then also for the negative, I will say is like I'm still putting this as a negative. I'm very happy. I'm very proud that they gave 100% effort. They gave 100% effort, and it showed on the field because they actually led versus the Crimson Tide. They didn't play conservative. They didn't play afraid at all. They were the Valiant Volunteers, and they showed it by the way they were playing, including competing with Alabama for more than 45 game minutes, except I'm still, as far as the negative, is the fact that they lost this game that was a close game for more than 45 game minutes, and also being that this became the embarrassment that I didn't want to see, except it did become that in the fourth quarter, and Alabama covers the spread. Alabama did cover the spread, and well, obviously Tennessee didn't win the game. It's like, and I'm very happy they kept the game close, except I'm not a person that's going to fool. I'm not a person that's going to be like, well, I'm happy with this moral victory of they kept the game close. It was expected to be a blowout for most of the game, or they got the moral victory of keeping the game close for more than 45 game minutes, because a team either wins the game or they lose the game. And if they lose the game was close for whatever amount of minutes and they still lose that game, that still sucks. There's no, well, this is less disappointing because they lost the game, except they still kept it close they still kept the game close. So it's a moral victory, because moral victory is just fooling yourself. It's just a person attempting to a person attempting to fool himself or herself that the loss doesn't suck when it does suck, because even if the game is close and the team loses, then it still sucks, because the object of the game is to win the game, not to keep this game close, get a moral victory, and be satisfied with a loss. That's not the object. That's not the object of any sport, including football. So I'm not a person. I mean, I am the glass is half full, but I'm not the glass is half full that I'm going to be, well, I'm happy with this moral victory of they kept that game close. They got that moral victory. So yeah, I'm completely satisfied. I'm not. I'm still disappointed with the defeat. And yeah, I'm still very unhappy with this defeat, except I'm able to move on from that. Not just for the fact that they were able to beat the Kentucky Wildcats, also because I'm optimistic that the Tennessee Volunteers are going to make a statement this Saturday, November 13th, 2021, by beating the juggernaut, #1 undefeated Georgia Bulldogs in Rocky Top. On a Saturday afternoon, going to be most likely finished in the evening, which is going to be on CBS. Starts at 2:30 Central Time on CBS. Anyways, on to the Kentucky Wildcats game. This 45-42. It was a higher scoring game than what I predicted, except I don't mind, because the Tennessee Volunteers still won an amazing, high scoring, unforgettable game, 45-42. The defense defended when needed, and even also highly entertaining. Just entertaining to watch. It wasn't just the fact that the defense defended when needed. There was an interception, returned for a touchdown, and there was some commentator calling this volunteer defender commenting on his celebration as the Cookie Monster or something like that. So I was not, when I was watching the highlights, because I watched this game at DJ's dugout. I didn't have audio, so now I'm watching it now on the TV and actually getting the audio that was said in the game. So I was just really entertained that this volunteer defender that made a great play is being called the Cookie Monster, which I wasn't expecting it at all, and it was pretty. It's going to be very memorable hearing that he was called, this volunteer defender that made a great play in a high-scoring game for Kentucky Wildcats was called the Cookie Monster. And so, yeah, I was extremely happy with that. This had a lot of highly entertaining plays, including Kentucky Wildcat QB. He made this really high jump, and he was able to score a touchdown. And the Volunteers, this game had the over, and I was unhappy that I would say on the negative is the fact that obviously the Volunteers gave up multiple sacks in this game, and so that was mainly the fact that the Volunteers did miss a field goal. I mean, I know they were only up by 3, but that does make it more challenging, because that does give the challenge to the Kentucky Wildcats, because they would have had to score a touchdown to tie the game and need to make an extra point to win the game, instead of, they can just tie the game. Even if they can't get a touchdown, they can still tie the game with a field goal, except they still won the game. Except I'll just say that as negative. It's they were able to avoid that versus Kentucky, except if they play some other better quality opponent, including that was against a better. I'm very happy that they got to accept. It's just best to make it more challenging to. That wasn't a flaw for this game, except if they had played, hypothetically, if that's what the Georgia-Tennessee game comes down to, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Georgia is able to win that game, because Tennessee doesn't make this field goal to increase the lead to 6, or maybe doesn't increase the lead to, maybe it could be 10, and Georgia Bulldogs are able to tie the game and win in overtime, or they're able to move the football and score the game-winning touchdown, because the Volunteers are only leading by 6 or 5, 4, whatever it is, which makes So, this game it had big plays, had had big plays by the Kentucky Wildcats offense, had big plays by the Tennessee Volunteers offense. Kentucky Wildcats defense ended up playing great because they had like more than 3 sacks. So I'm just really happy in what was a challenging game for the Tennessee Volunteers, because usually it is challenging to win a game versus a winning team if that team gives up more than 2 sacks, 42 points, and doesn't increase the lead to 6 late in the fourth, when this team has already shown that it has the ability to score 42 points. So it's highly possible that this team could win with a touchdown. So I'm just really happy with all of those flaws. The Tennessee Volunteers were still able to win this game. This unforgettable, amazing, high-scoring 45-42 game. And I was also very happy that the Tennessee Volunteers end up winning this game, because it was a depressing day, because it was a depressing day for my other two teams, Nebraska Cornhuskers. They gave me a watchable game in the first half, kept it watchable in the first half, kept it watchable in the second half, except they weren't able to finish on what I thought was going to be a comeback against a great Ohio State Buckeyes team, because they were just able to score. They outscored Nebraska in both the first half and the second half. So that was very depressing to watch. The fact that, Nebraska is going to give me the happiness of they're going to keep the game close, watchable, and entertaining, except they get outscored in the first half and they get outscored in the second half, which is just really depressing in a game that was close, an entertaining close game in both the first half and the second half. I mean, it's just really depressing. I mean, I know the Buckeyes are a great team, so they had already gotten beat by the Oregon Ducks, and I know Nebraska's not in the same league as the Oregon Ducks right now. They're a team that still has to learn how to win, and they have a losing record. But except they have that much of an ability. They've shown they have the ability to they have that ability to beat a great team if they just close. I mean, they didn't close against Michigan State. They didn't close against Michigan. So I'm like, you can't say that they just don't have that ability. Because, I mean, they showed they have the ability, because they're leading late versus Michigan State, leading late versus Michigan. So it's just really very frustrating that they were not able to complete that comeback against Ohio State. And in some ways, more disappointing just for the fact that they actually led. I mean, it's more disappointing just for the fact that, if they weren't able, the fact that they were able to give me some optimism that maybe they're going to take the lead, force overtime, or take the lead, and they're not able to do that because they got outscored in the first half and they got outscored in the second half. So, that's a game where if I had not watched, I'd be less depressed, because I would just look at the information like, okay, they got outscored in the first half and they got outscored in the second half. And also because the Washington Huskies, they ended up losing to the Oregon Ducks in a game. They dominated that first quarter. It gave me optimism. They're going to be able to keep this game close and possibly, but I'm still fearful. I'm still not celebrating yet, because there's still a large amount of time yet, and I was right to not celebrate, because the Oregon Ducks just completely changed that momentum after they scored the first touchdown, because Washington Huskies were not able to score needed points after that. And then when they finally did, it's because, they were, except that was after they were losing after they trailed by more than 10 points in the fourth quarter. So that game completely changed after the Oregon Ducks had scored their first touchdown, and it just went from bad to worse. Yes, it just went from bad to worse. So, that was very frustrating to watch. So I'm very happy that, with the disappointment of the Cornhuskers losing to the Buckeyes, which was at home, my Washington Huskies losing in what was a winnable game to a great Oregon Ducks team in Washington, in Husky Stadium, called the greatest setting in college football, that the Volunteers gave me the high amount of happiness of they won. So Huskies failed me, Cornhuskers failed me, except that both of those are less depressing, are are not a high degree, but just a slight, just some amount less depressing for me, because I still got the extreme amount of happiness of Tennessee Volunteers defeating a ranked, not great, just most likely just good Kentucky Wildcats team on the road in a high-scoring, unforgettable game, 45-42.